Yeah, I forgot to like clarify that.
Good morning, everyone. Could you please take your seats? Good morning. You need some more coffee. Good morning. That's better. Thank you. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you to our Del One Conference Center here at the Terry campus of Delaware Tech. My name is Justina Thomas, and I serve as the Executive Vice President for the college, and I am a member of the Vision Coalition leadership team. As I prepared for my welcome this morning, I thought about how truly connected we all are as we strive to provide quality education and holistic supports for all of the students whom we serve along the education spectrum, from our littlest learners to our middle and high schoolers and to our college students and continuing education students. All of us in this room are connected through our passion to serve and succeed, and we are all committed to ensuring equitable access and outcomes for all students. Delaware Tech has a tagline within our mission statement that you'll often hear our president, who was here, I'm not sure if he's still in the room, Dr. Brainerd, and some of our representatives from the college say, and that is, students are the center of everything we do. And what that means for us at Delaware Tech is opening our doors to anyone seeking a higher education, reducing barriers to entry and progression, and doing all we can to make sure every student gets what they need, when and how they need it. It is not easy work, but it is worthwhile work. So I appreciate why we are here today, and we all want what is best for our students in this great state of Delaware. So I want to thank you for being on our campus and in this beautiful room of the Del One Conference Center. And thank you to Secretary Martin for being here and all of our Vision Coalition leadership team members. Logistics-wise, just to make sure you know, there are refreshments in the back of the room. Restrooms are either way. You can go out the doors here or here and go this way, and you'll find those restrooms. And we have staff who are around if you have any questions or concerns. And I'd like to thank our staff for hosting today. Thank you. At this time, I would like to welcome to the podium the chair for the Vision Coalition leadership team, Bettina Tuorti-Riveros. Thank you and have a great morning.
Thank you so much, Justina, for such a warm welcome back to Del Tech. It's always great to be here, and today is no exception to that. We're so comfortable here and so welcomed here, and we're very grateful to Del Tech for your generosity in hosting us. I'm Bettina Tuorti-Riveros. I serve as the Chief Health Equity and Chief Public Affairs Officer at Christiana Care and serve as the chair of the Vision Coalition. We were just here in March for the release of the Student Equity and Excellence 2035 plan. Was anyone in the room here for that event or any of our previous equity and education events? Terrific. It's really wonderful that you were able to join us, and welcome back to you. And for those who are first timers, welcome to today's event. So let's see who's with us today and test out our technology. If you can use your devices to let us know which of these groups you represent, you can scan the QR code and we'll find out who all's in the room today. You can use the QR code, which is on your table as well. Yes. Apparently the devices are called Mentimeters, which was a new word for me. All righty. So as we collect that data and see how our technology is working, I'll just continue and just share how excited I am to welcome you to the continuation of our Equity in Education series, which we've now been doing for almost 3 years. Pardon? Can we go back to this slide with the QR code, please? Whoever's got the... All right, let's try this again.
If you go to the next slide, there's a website. Go to the top 5 Mentimeter at the top. Bring your phone to Mentimeter.com and put the code in. Because you can't see that.
Learning on the fly. This is good.
Okay, there we go.
All right. And that you see that code up top. We're starting to get some good results here. Okay, so seeing some nonprofit partners, great group of students. I know I saw you all gathered in your huddle earlier. Nonprofit partners, some parents, and others. Even more students. That's terrific. You're probably the best at using the technology. Okay, so we'll let that continue to add up, and we'll be sharing that later on or following the meeting. So as I said, I'm really excited to welcome you to the continuation of our Equity in Education series. And as I noted, we've been doing this for almost 3 years. If you aren't familiar with the Vision Coalition, we're a group of education, business, nonprofit, and community leaders from across the state. And our leadership team is here, and I'd ask members of the Vision Coalition leadership team to stand up. Really grateful for all of your work. We meet a lot, very active group, and really grateful for you to join us today and for all your work on the Vision Coalition. So here in Delaware, we've been working on school funding for the past 2 decades, and we're excited to see the momentum happening in our state, which you will hear more about throughout the day, and obviously as we continue to move forward on that work. In our newest 10-year plan, Student Equity in Education 2035, C-2035, we identified several priorities when it comes to student-centered funding, which are on the crosswalk at your tables and here on the screen as well. We're really excited to see the alignment and agreement on so many of these recommendations in the work of the Funding Commission. So the crosswalk on your table outlines the Vision Coalition's C-2035 priorities, the Public Education Funding Commission's commitments, the AIR report. You may recall we launched that report here when it was first published and in 2023. And it also has information on the current Delaware context and the national context. Feel free to use that crosswalk document throughout the day, take notes, and use it as a reference. We'll also be using the QR code and the Mentimeter to collect your input and thoughts throughout the day. I'm sure that will go smoother now that we've tested it out. And the QR code will be on the slides. We'll try to have our panelists also answer your questions today and then follow up as needed following the meeting. As I've mentioned, we've been at this work for a while, starting back in 2023. That's brought us to today. And today we will be hearing from the Public Education Funding Commission on their progress to date, which is really exciting to see that progress. We're going to have a conversation with some national experts who are so wonderful to join us here today on how they can share some insights and learnings from other states on how to move forward into implementation and what we should be considering as we're moving forward. But first, I want to introduce you to Tyler Gunter. Great picture of Tyler. Tyler is the Delaware State Board of Education student member from MOT Charter School and a member of the PEFC, the Public Education Funding Commission. Tyler, thank you for bringing the student perspective to our conversation today. Really thrilled that you're here.
Thank you, Bettina, for that lovely introduction. And good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Tyler Gunter, and I'm proud to be the student member of the Delaware State Board of Education and a member of the Public Education Funding Commission. Today, you hear me as the voice of one, but this one voice represents roughly 138,000 students from across our great state. Students in cities and rural towns, students in small schools and large ones, from every background, students who expect me to speak up to ensure that their needs are at the center of every decision that we make. And I want to recognize some of the students that we have in the room with us today. From Polytech, Milford, Aspira, and the Sussex County Youth Philanthropy Board. Can you please stand? Thank you. As Bettina mentioned, the crosswalks on your table show something important. When we look at C-2035, the Funding Commission's commitments, the AIR report, and the realities facing our schools, the alignment is clear. And what's powerful about that alignment is that today's discussion is not academic. It's real. It's about people, futures, and opportunity. Over the last few months, especially throughout October and November, the Commission has spent hours digging into what student-centered funding must look like in practice. Serving as the only student at the table has taught me two important things: the complexity of this work, but also the urgency of it. And I want you all to know that this work is not abstract for us. For multilingual learners, student-centered funding means having teachers and support that help them thrive, not just keep pace. For students from low-income families, it means that opportunities do not have to disappear because of your zip code. And for students with disabilities or unique learning needs, it means that resources are made to meet them where they are, not made to put them into a system that doesn't or wasn't designed for them. And for every student in Delaware, it makes sure that we are seen as a whole person, not just as a line in a formula. Everyone in this room, educators, district leaders, nonprofit partners, business and community organizations, and policymakers plays a deciding role in what happens next. And the message that I want to share with you today is clear. We must remain committed. We have the alignment, we have the momentum, we have a vision that puts students first, but that turning that vision into reality requires courage from all of us. And the courage to invest boldly, the courage to think with to innovate thoughtfully, and to stand for equity, not just when it's easy, but especially when it is challenging. As someone who sits on both the State Board of Education and the PEFC, I see how decisions made in rooms just like this can affect real experiences for our students. The thousands of students that I represent are counting on us to move from intention to action. Thank you all for including the student voice in today's conversation. Thank you all for your commitment to building a fair, stronger, and more student-centered public education system for every child in Delaware. May God bless you, and may God bless the students and educators of our beloved first state. Thank you.
Wow, Tyler, really inspiring remarks. You are calling us to action, calling for our continued commitment, our courage, and to stand for equity. Really inspiring words, and I feel great confidence in the terrific representation that you're providing. So thanks so much for joining us here today. I'm now going to introduce our first panel, who will tell us more about the work that the PEFC has done to date. And I'd like to welcome Secretary of Education Cindy Martin, Emily Falcon, CFO of Colonial School District and President of DASA, Midra Surratt, Executive Director of the Parent Information Center, and Taylor Hawk with DSEA. So welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to join on stage, that would be terrific.
Good morning. I'm Taylor Hawk with the Delaware State Education Association. We represent now nearly 15,000 active and retired Delaware educators, specialists, and education support professionals. Senator Sturgeon, who chairs the PEFC, was sorry that she couldn't be here, so I'm stepping in this morning to share a little bit of background on the PEFC, who we are, and how we were formed. Established by a legislative resolution, the PEFC has 33 members, a diverse group of community members, educators, policymakers, state leaders, and very grateful to have our student representative as well, that are really charged with looking at how we can improve and strengthen our education funding system. So first, will the members of the PEFC please stand? I know we have several on the stage right here, all of us. So we have been meeting since September 2024 and have made some really impressive progress and momentum in that time. And just to look back at our charge and timeline, again, we are really looking to make the biggest difference for students and educators, and have spent so much time learning and now coalescing around a model that we hope to see movement on in the next year, which is very, very exciting. So our timeline. We are looking to engage members of the public and continue monthly meetings, present legislation to the General Assembly in 2026 so that the changes to the formula can be planned in the 2027 and 2028 school year. So as you can see, we are really looking to chart out a thoughtful timeline that provides the runway to a steady and really effective implementation in school districts. Yes, I know. Should we all duck? Can you all see? Well, we've got these great computers around the or screens around the room, so please take a look. And just as a reminder, please use the QR code on the table to submit your questions. And now I'm going to turn it over to our thoughtful leader and partner, Secretary Cindy Martin, to talk about our principles and how those support the priorities of the administration and the Department of Education.
Well, I love a good timeline because then you can see the measurables along the way. And Tyler, thank you for your opening comments. Your statement around this is a place and a path forward where students can be seen as a whole person, not just a line and a formula. Exactly. That says it all. I mean, we can see are we switching to the next slide with the principles? Oh, no, never mind. I'll just say what they are. But you said it. You said where we're going and why this matters so much, because the why really is what matters more than anything. When I think about everybody on the commission and the work that's been happening to help unpack something that needed to be unpacked and has been worked on for a long time, everybody that stood up a minute ago when you said PEFC members have really been wrestling with something. And when you can wrestle something to the ground and have the clarity that Tyler just shared with us, you move an entire state forward in a way that our students deserve. So for me, I think it's a gift to be able to do this work with everybody, to be able to be part of a team that is taking on something that has been stuck for a really long time. I love that kind of work. I said that when we launched the Student Equity and Excellence project right in this room. I like when we commit to something big that hasn't been done before and we get it done. And we have to be centered in the why. Like, why do we need to do this? Because when we talk about a funding formula, I think a lot of times it sounds super technical and really abstract and hard for people to understand, except Emily. Like, people that do it every day, like, they get it, but how do you translate that to real work, real decisions, real outcomes for kids every day? Because underneath all of the charts and the models and the graphs and the formulas and the spreadsheets, it's something really simple. Tyler already said it. It's every child in Delaware, in every community, deserves to have what they need when they need it, in the way that they need it. That's what equity looks like. Not just the average child, but every child, each and every child getting what they need when they need it, in the way that they need it, where they need it, that their zip code does not determine their destiny. Their demography does not determine their destiny. And so the principles that PEFC agreed on are really just different ways of protecting that commitment and doing it in law and doing it with dollars attached to it. That's what's behind all the principles. So principle one is a student-centered, needs-based. It has to be student-centered, and it has to be based on students' need. That's where the funding will flow in ways that gets outcomes that are different than what we're currently seeing. It simply costs more to educate some students, no matter how you look at it. Where there's greater need, there should be greater investment. Students living in poverty, our multilingual learners, our students with disabilities, and our students with mental health needs that need additional wraparound services so they show up ready to learn. And when something in life interrupts their ability to be ready to learn, it doesn't take them off track because the funding and the supports are right there in the school where it's needed. And so what you see is this proposed hybrid model moves us towards a system where funding is directly tied to need, greater investment. And we transition from a formula that is, I don't know how many years old, but many decades old, to something that aligns with what you know and we all know is needed. The Student Equity and Excellence 2035 plan was really clear. And this aligns to that as well. More resources based on student needs and more flexibility to be able to respond to those needs. So local school boards, superintendents, principals, and teachers, those closest to the students, can say this is what our students need to be able to move student achievement at the school level. So at the Department of Education, that's directly tied to our priorities around early literacy, stronger tier 1 instruction, real access to career pathways for each and every community, because those things only work if the dollars actually go to where the investments are needed, to where the students need them the most. The second principle in the formula is flexibility with guardrails. The flexibility with guardrails really matters. How do you have flexibility without the guardrails? You can have one without the other and you don't get there. Our current unit system was designed kind of in a different era. And over time, we've layered on grants and carve-outs and workarounds and other ways to get after equity to make the whole system function. In the long term, that's not sustainable for districts. It doesn't work in the long term, and it doesn't meet the moment that we're in right now. But we can thoughtfully make it work with the flexibility and the right guardrails. So the principles we've agreed on to move us towards a model where there's schools and districts have more flexibility, more flexible funds that are designed to support their students' needs. Let the districts make decisions along with teacher voice, parent voice, and research base that we know in terms of what works for students. And then we can keep a strong focus while we do this on transparency. We have to be able to report to one another, to our school communities, to our parents on how this is actually working. So families and educators can actually see, how is this money benefiting the kids? So that ties to Department of Education. The flexibility is essential to our own strategic plan at the Department of Education, because that allows us to strengthen the supports and services that we're providing at the Delaware Department of Education. So we go beyond positions on paper to actually outcomes that support the model for the school and making sure kids get the personalized supports they need. And then the third principle, change pages. We want predictable, stable, and understandable funding. Stability and predictability really matters. And we're in a series of getting community input. We have another one tonight. We're hearing that people want to hear the predictability from CFO, superintendent, school boards matter, but communities want to know that too. Stable, predictable, equitable funding is a game changer for communities, because I hear it over and over again from our superintendents, from our charter leaders, from our school boards. Give us a system that we can understand, that we can plan around, and that we can trust in an ongoing way. So the new model is designed so that we can easily calculate and know what to expect, know what to anticipate, know what the reliable funding will look like over time. And that's not just a technical win. Technically, it does matter for good budget planning, but students win when you have predictable funding like that. More stability for staffing and programs can occur. And then there's fewer ebbs and flows of money comes with the grant and then it goes away, and money comes and then it goes away, and then this is enacted and then that's disenacted, and you can't count on it. You don't have that ebb and flow. You have consistent, stable, predictable funding, and that gives you a stronger foundation for the long-term work. So that just all ties to the DOE's priorities. When you think about what we're focused on at the Department of Education, the PEFC principles and our priorities are completely aligned. We need a system that starts early, investing in pre-K and early literacy. That's the first line of equity. You get those two things right and everything else flows very well. We need a system that supports strong teaching, that aligns funding and to the coaching, to the materials, to the mental health supports that help our educators do the best work. It's our second priority. And then we need a system that opens real pathways from middle school through graduation, especially in career technical education, so every student can see themselves in Delaware's future economy. So the Department of Ed's priorities, PEFC priorities, have very tight alignment now on how we're using these dollars. For me, it's not just about changing a formula. We know that that needs to happen, but it's so much bigger than that. This is about building a funding system that finally matches the values that we hold so dearly in our hearts. I've not met one person in this state that's not aligned to the values that will deliver better outcomes for kids. How we do it, by changing something that hasn't been changed in a long time, is tricky. And we're going to wrestle that to the ground, and we're going to stay true to our values so we end up in a place that is more student-centered, more equitable, more flexible, and allows us to deliver the kinds of results that we know Delaware students are capable of. Makes it very clear. So thank you to my fellow commissioners, members of the Vision Coalition. I love when all of these different groups can align to one common clear vision for our state. This is what matters. This is how we move forward together. And most importantly, thank you to our bosses, the students, because you are actually who we work for. Thank you. Now I turn it over to Emily.
Thank you, Secretary Martin. So I have the somewhat unenviable job of trying to actually give you some of the more technical details of what the Funding Commission has been working on. This slide is very busy, but it is, I think, the first slide that I've ever seen that tries to condense Delaware's funding system into one PowerPoint slide. So I'm quite proud of it. But it does indicate that students are currently the building block of our system. Units are generated based on student counts. And I'm not going to go into all of the different specifics that are on here because I think this room is pretty educated on what our current system looks like. And you know that it's not quite working the way that it was designed to work. But the one thing I do want to point out is that currently the only need that our system recognizes in terms of student counts is your grade level and your special education status. And that may have worked at one point in time, but today's students do have different needs. And as the secretary said, you know, more needs comes with more cost, more services need to be provided, more supports, et cetera. So this was our starting point, right? How was the system designed, and how and this is another graphic that we used in a presentation that was done to the commission about actually a year ago in December of 24. This was how it was designed to work, right? So we've got different layers of funding and it's a solid structure. What has happened over time, and the secretary alluded to this, is that well-intended investments have been made. We've had lots of great programs that have intended to address some of the deficiencies of our system, but they've been done in a way that doesn't recognize how the system actually works and have left districts struggling to cover some of the more basic, cost of business items that require, it requires a strong foundation to be able to do all the program work and all the supportive work that our students require today. And in a lot of cases, that foundational funding really has been ignored at the, for budgetary concerns. So, well, let's add this program, let's add this line of funding, let's add this initiative, while the base continued to really strain under the weight of how the system was not getting invested at that level. And you can see the tiny little taxpayer at the bottom intending to, kind of shore up the system. Right. So we really started from why the system wasn't working today and using the strengths of the system to offer solutions on how to improve it and how to move it forward into the next iteration of our funding model. What you see on this slide is really a very high-level overview of what the new structure of the system is going to look like. So we're retaining a lot of the good things about our system. It's going to have dedicated funding for teaching positions, instructional positions, key positions that we know are necessary to run our schools. And it's going to streamline a lot of the other funding sources and all of those disparate programs into 2 additional tiers of funding that are really targeted and weighted for student populations, and recognizing that multilingual learners need more support, we know that, and low-income learners need more support. So that opportunity tier is targeted to provide additional resources to those 2 demographics of students. And then the operational tier provides basically that foundational operational funding so that districts can continue to operate with a little bit more flexibility and fewer buckets of money to try to manage, to, you know, stretch to make things work. But that's also going to be targeted so that it does recognize more funding being needed for multilingual learners, low-income students. And there's also recognition in that tier for students with disabilities, as well as just your overall student enrollment count. Because that's, you know, it's important to recognize how many students you have in the funding. So, thank you. Just a couple other notes on moving outside of the actual model. Some of the things that would be different, the funding in those 2, the opportunity tier and the operational tier, are weighted student funding tiers. So that is going to be school level allocations of dollars that are going to be targeted to those populations. So districts are going to have more flexibility to utilize the funds where they are needed. That flexibility really is where, you know, we think the community input is super important, because parents, community members are going to be able to talk to their school boards, talk to their administrators to say, you know, this is where we think the dollars should be invested that we're receiving for these students and these supports. We have really focused the majority of the time on the Funding Commission so far on the state funding, and haven't really looked at local funding yet. We are, you know, that is scheduled for the spring. And there's also a couple components of the current system that really don't fit into the primary funding formula, if you will. Funding for transportation, for student nutrition, for capital funding for school construction. All of those things are going to sit outside of this hybrid formula that we're proposing. And another important note is that because the state was really in the process of finalizing the reassessment process, we couldn't really look at equalization. Equalization is where property wealth disparities are also considered in addition to student need disparities, right? So we've got student equity on one hand, and then wealth equity from the local side on the other. We have not been able to look at wealth equity yet because the reassessment data was sort of just coming into being. And there was also another committee that was doing a separate work effort. Those have now been aligned. So the Funding Commission is looking as a next step to incorporate equalization into our recommendations going forward. So that'll be where we are looking to go in the spring. And I'm trying to see, yep, so the engagement piece, I'm not sure if that's me or not. That is, there you go. That was a bad handoff, I apologize.
How about now? Okay. So one thing I will say, I was given some talking points, and that's really helpful for me because I have a tendency to go off on a tangent and can do that, particularly if it's something that I'm passionate about. But as a commission member, as well as a representative of parents, a parent organization, community-based organization, I truly appreciate the intentionality around thinking about with this model and the revised model and this hybrid model. Are we meeting all the needs of the students, and are there multiple opportunities for families and community members to provide that input? As was mentioned by my fellow commission members, we've had a very complex funding model and a very complex system, and it's very difficult to understand. And if, as professionals, it's difficult to understand, it's even more complex for families and community members to understand and to be able to provide meaningful feedback. And so the intentionality around the community engagement sessions and opportunities for students and families and community members to understand the thought and the rationale behind the hybrid model, to provide multiple opportunities to ask questions. I truly appreciate that, not only as a community-based organization, but also as a parent of children who are currently in the public school system. And I'm also a product of Delaware's public school system. And so I want this to continue. I want my children to benefit from the education that I had as well. And I know that I share that with many families. And so there have been 3 public engagement sessions that have already taken place prior to Thanksgiving, and then there are additional community engagement sessions, as you see here on the screen. One is tonight at Cape Henlopen High School, and then tomorrow at Polytech Adult Education Center. And then there are additional opportunities you can either access through provide your feedback through the QR code that is on your table, and sign up for the Vision Coalition newsletter for additional updates for meetings. But please, there are many professionals, I know there are students, and there are some parents in the room. There are also many community members and professionals. Please share this information with families and with your respective communities, so that they understand and they know that there are multiple opportunities to participate and engage in this process. This is really a once in a lifetime opportunity. And so we really want families and the community to be a part of this process as well. And so now I will turn it over to Victor from Aspira, who will lead the Q&A section.
Thank you so much, and hello, everybody. As you guys may know already, my name is Victor Medina. I'm from Aspira Charter High School, and I'll be your moderator for your questions. So the first question is, how will the PFCs recommend changes directly improve funding and resources for students in districts with higher needs, especially rural and low-income areas? Whoever wants to start answering, you guys may.
I'll jump in to start. I think the biggest thing that the system that we're proposing offers is really a supercharged investment in the recognizing the needs of the populations you mentioned. Currently, Delaware does have opportunity funding that goes out on a per pupil basis. It's roughly $1,000. I think it's $988 a student. The formula that we are proposing has an amount of close to $5,000 for low income and ML students. And those are rough numbers, please don't quote me, but the level of investment and the level of need that can be addressed with these additional funds is really going to make a difference for the students. And we think it really will be a game changer for those populations. And anybody?
You said it perfectly.
Thank you. So the next question is, what supports will be in place for MLL students?
I'm happy to jump in because I was just actually on a Zoom meeting with some LML teachers in Sussex County this week. And the exact slide that you mentioned, that supercharged investment, I mean, we're looking at almost 4 times as much funding per MLL student across the state. And that's the slide every time I show it to any of our educators across the state, the eyes go like this. Because they know that that level of support will show up in their classroom, and they know that the level of support they need is directly connected to the students that they serve. So that type of, again, I love the phrase supercharged investment. Our educators know that will make a significant difference for students.
And talking about, it's a dollar amount that's 4 times the amount, as you just heard from my colleagues. Your question was, so what's going to happen for MLL students? So you can have more dollars. It's what you do with the dollars matters too. And so when I say those are local decisions, we have supports at the Delaware Department of Education for multilingual learners. We have a whole department, a whole team committed to that. in terms of state level supports, but local superintendents, school boards, school staff, the teachers that you were talking to have a lot of ideas of what they want to do to support English learners, depending where multilingual learners are on a continuum. Are they a newcomer that they don't have a base of literacy in their home language, or they do? Depending on where they are on a continuum, the investments are different. And so those become hyper local. It's supercharged and hyper local so that decisions can be made. But with support from there's a knowledge base out there around supporting multilingual learners that we don't need to start from scratch in Delaware. There's some incredible programs. Delta is a group of teachers. That's the acronym. I don't remember what it stands for, but that have been really strong advocates and powerful examples in Delaware of where we are supporting multilingual learners very well. But with greater investment, we now either we take some of the small pockets of excellence and now we can finally scale them, or maybe there's some best practice that we haven't been able to do yet with multilingual learners because we haven't had this level of investment, and we might some districts might stand up new programs too with these new dollars.
Thank you so much. Our next question from the audience will be, what are you considering as you start to talk about local funding?
Yeah, local funding is, honestly, it's another area where there have not been many significant reforms in a very long time. The biggest thing, reassessment, which was part of the lawsuit that led to really, the report that was done by the AIR team that led to the funding commission. So that lawsuit was part of why we're all here. Reassessment being a part of that recognized that, property taxes are the way that districts generate local funding. And when you don't reassess your property values over time, that creates stagnant funding. And that has really negative impacts on, schools' abilities to meet needs of students over time, because there's no way for that pot of money to grow except for going out to referendum and asking taxpayers to pay more. So hopefully having a rolling reassessment and having those values be updated on a regular basis, that's going to provide a more solid foundation on the local side to start from. And it also gives us an opportunity to look at equalization, which again is, another complicated formula that looks at the wealth of a district and relative to how much it's taxing, how much it can tax. But when the basis of that information is the property values, and those are kind of stale and stagnant and inaccurate, it leads to inaccurate allocations of state dollars. So we have an opportunity to really look at that with fresh eyes and fresh data to see how do we redo that formula or reallocate those funds in a way that recognizes today's reality of what are the wealth disparities today on our local within our districts, and then what is the best method to really get those dollars out to the districts that need them for the services. So that's sort of where we're going in terms of other ideas that are on the table. I don't want to assume what the commission might begin to talk about, but I know that equalization really is sort of the biggest next step that we need to conquer.
Add one more thing, sorry, onto that, because just to put kind of a real world example about how this manifests from district to district. If you look at the local salary components, even in the same county, even in bordering districts, you're talking about thousands of dollars from one district that touches another district right next door. And that has significant impacts on their ability to, again, retain the staff that they need in order to support their students. I mean, this is real. This is a real issue. And you have districts with very different tax bases. So they could go out and they could ask for the exact same tax increase as the district next door. And yet what they're able to produce from that increase looks wildly different. And I think the opportunity that we have now to build a state funding system that accounts for, again, those local wealth disparities, it's an opportunity that we haven't had in decades here.
If you go back to the slide with the House and all of those things on top of it, that it was crushing. Emily was saying it's crushing under its own weight. To get back to also to the answer the question, when you think about all of those things that have been layered on top, just take it to a house analogy. If your foundation is cracked in your house, you got a problem. You got to actually, if you try to sell I'm not a real estate agent, so I don't really know, but I know that somehow if there's a cracked foundation, you have a problem selling your house. So you got to fix that. And with all of the things that have been layered on top to try to fix the cracks in the foundation, and now the entire thing is just literally buckling under its own weight. If you took those things that have been layered, well, Emily said it, well intentioned, none of them were wrong or bad. They were trying to fix a serious problem. But over time, now if you take all of the dollars that went into those and you put them into fix the foundation, fix the base, there's money that went into that. That money can go into fixing it. It's a simple analogy, but it's a way to talk about how does this all flow. And so the local part of it matters, like how much of it is flowing from the top, from the state, just layering on top, when at the bottom, we have some structural things that need to be changed. All of this moves us in the direction to fixing the structural changes overall, all with the same right intentions, but a different approach that's more sustainable, more flexible, more long-term, not a Band-Aid.
Thank you. Our next question is, can you say a bit more about how the Commission intends to address referendum reform?
I know that referendum, the strict system that we have for raising local revenue has to be part of the conversation. It's a conversation that I don't believe has been fully had at the commission level yet, but it's an issue that we're feeling and that districts are feeling really acutely across the state, again, to make sure that they're able to keep up and continue to recruit and retain the talent that they need in order to support students. We're looking at a lot of my calls, honestly, lately have been referendum campaigns. The amount of time and money that goes in to just making sure you can keep up with the cost of living in your school districts. We don't have ballot questions in Delaware, but the one area of voter approval that we have is keeping our public schools afloat. So I know that it will be part of the conversation. I can say as one individual commission member, what we think about the system and how restrictive it is, but it's definitely gonna require a lot of balancing of predictability and stability for taxpayers, which is also incredibly important. We represent taxpayers. We represent retired members who are on a fixed income. We need to make sure that there is predictability and stability for them too. But that needs to be balanced with making sure that we can fund our public schools in a reliable and consistent way.
Really great to say it. Thank you. Um, with that being said, where does the career and technical education fit in the proposed hybrid formula?
So career and technical or vocational funding is absolutely a part of the formula. One of the things that we have recognized in doing this work is that the way that Delaware currently accounts for vocational programming creates some data challenges. We don't collect the data by student. We really look at how many courses are being offered and what the sort of the course load is. Which makes it hard to tie back to individual students. So there is a component of vocational funding built into the hybrid model, but there is a need to look at the data, how it's being collected, how that data gets weighted in the formula. And that's another important thing to mention about the formula itself. The structure of having the 3 tiers and having the weights around the student demographic populations, that's really where the agreement has been so far. We recognize that the weights themselves, how each individual demographic category is actually weighted, should change over time. Not because we didn't get it right the first time, because we may not, but that the needs of the students and the needs of our kids are going to change over time. So one of the important things that we've talked about at the commission is if this is the last thing we do, shame on us. Because part of the reason we have to do this work is that the system was allowed to stay stagnant, right? And there weren't regular investments. It's like any other system or any other thing. You know, if you ignore your car for 5 years, don't expect it to work very well. We have to put in that preventative maintenance. We have to maintain it and make sure that it is continuing to recognize the needs of the students as they as they are coming into our schools, and that's going to change over time. So the vocational is part of it now, but we know we have a little bit of work to do to make sure that it is calibrated correctly to get the best support out there for those programs and make sure that they are, you know, thriving in this new hybrid model.
Thank you. With that being said, our next question, what is the PEFC's plan for reviewing and continuously improving the model?
I was actually just about to speak to that. Just to Emily's point, I think that, you know, we have been very intentional about understanding that there's fluidity in this process, and that there's going to be opportunities to review and assess and revise throughout the process, which I can personally appreciate. It keeps us from staying stagnant or remaining stagnant, and also being intentional about creating a model that's responsive to the needs of our children and needs of our schools. And so there have been, I failed to mention that there are 2 additional community engagement meetings that were being planned for January, but even as a commission, there will be multiple opportunities to assess and reassess. So even though there's a proposed hybrid funding model that's in place right now, the intent is to make sure that we are regularly reviewing that model. We are assessing that model. We're assessing it for effectiveness. We are engaging with the community and with our stakeholders to ensure that it is in fact working, and then responding as needed. And so that's one of the aspects that I truly appreciate in this process.
Really appreciate your answer. And how much additional investment will be needed, and how will taxpayers know the dollars are being well spent?
That's the $64,000 question, more than that. Transparency is one of the things I said is a key goal, is that people understand where the money's flowing. And so any state that has passed a new funding formula, really in any sector, we're talking obviously education, but transportation, healthcare, when you have funding formula changes, for the public to understand it, how is the money flowing? School boards have to know, they have to be transparent with the public, the state, at the state level. We have to help make sure that there are tools that allow people to see how the dollars are flowing. The total dollar amount, I don't know what the dollar amount would be yet. Usually when there's a new funding formula, there's a hold harmless component with it, as well as the weighted formula. Where there's greater need, there needs to be greater investment. So we shall see as the days and weeks unfold.
And I'll add that the AIR report that I mentioned earlier identified the gap for Delaware for adequate funding, meaning that, you know, we actually are providing enough funding to meet the educational goals that we have set as a state. The gap is somewhere between $500 million to $1 billion of additional dollars needed. The numbers that we're looking at with the hybrid model are not that large, right? But it is going to require an investment, and I think we all recognize that that investment is needed, because, you know, we know we're not meeting the needs of all of our students adequately today. So there is going to be an added level of investment. I think the great thing about the hybrid system is that because it is building so much on the base system that we have, we can invest in it over time. And, you know, hopefully we can get public support to ramp up that investment and really, again, supercharge the amount of money that we can provide to education. But in the event that that's not politically viable or feasible, the foundation of the system is strong enough that we can keep going as those investments can be made over time. But I think there definitely is the need for additional dollars. And the accountability piece is, again, it's something that the commission has talked a lot about. It is one of the guiding principles to make sure that there is accountability built into the system. And I think that that goes along with the ongoing community engagement, right? Because, you know, if we as districts are expecting to receive hundreds of millions of dollars more of educational funding, we need to be ready to hear from our community and engage with our community in more meaningful ways to make sure that those dollars are being spent in ways that the community sees as valuable.
And just to add to that, I think the question reinforces why this timeline makes sense. Before we go out to voters and we ask them to invest in the house, we have to remodel and clean up the house. And I think by streamlining, by keeping what works, by streamlining the other components of the formula so that we can clearly communicate to voters, we are investing in the students that need additional supports, which we have decades and decades of research that show that when you target and increase investments, there are serious, not only societal benefits, but economic benefits. You see that those students then become adults that earn more over time. This is not only doing what is right, it is doing what is necessary for the economic future of Delaware. And I think once we are able to, again, clearly clean up the system, articulate the connections between the components of systems and the goals, we'll be able to then, I think, make a really strong case for increasing investment to the Delaware taxpayer.
Really great answers. Moving on with the next question. How much of the proposed hybrid models is based on unit positions?
There's always the lag when the microphone turns back on. So the unit count system is staying in the hybrid model. The foundation, that is the foundation of our system. And when you think about it, it's the foundation of education, right? Teachers in the classrooms is what we're all here to figure out how to better support and give them the tools they need, give them enough resources to make a difference for the kids in their classroom. So we're retaining the unit count. So that, the numbers, it's about 60% of the funding going through the model is going to be with the unit count, and I'm probably getting that number wrong because I didn't have it committed to memory. But the unit count as it stands today is going to remain in place a lot, because that is the house, right? That is that neat and tidy house that worked so many decades ago. We're now kind of cleaning up all of the stuff around that, making that more streamlined, and hopefully increasing that investment so that we do have the flexibility to meet the needs of our students. But to go back to that really complicated, busy slide, students are at the core of our unit count system, right? And they need to stay there because that's why we're all here.
Thank you so much. How does this model address the priority to be more streamlined and reduce administrative burden on schools and districts?
So I think part of my last answer, addressed that as well. A big part of the burden that districts have currently is we're managing literally dozens of different pots of money coming from the state. We also have pots of local money that we keep track of. And sometimes we can pool them together to get projects and programs done. Other times we can't. And this hybrid model offers us the opportunity to have more flexibility with the dollars that we do have, so that we can be responsive to what our schools need, what our community needs, what our students need. So the administrative burden is really going to come from kind of clearing the field with programmatic compliance type requirements that really are doing nothing but a checkbox, right? And I'm not throwing DOE under the bus, but a DOE report, check, right? They have to do the report because they were told they have to do the report. But it does create that burden on the entire system. And what we want to do with the accountability is really look at how do we get accountability without administrative burden? And I think that's some of the work that the commission also needs to look at going forward.
Well, since you brought us into it, I'll say something. The compliance reports that we have to do at the Department of Education, we know they can be an administrative burden. But when you go back to the house and all of those things that have been layered on top of the house, instead of fixing the foundation, every one of those things, well-intentioned, that have been added over time, were not just added with, here's some money to solve the problem, hope you do well. Anytime the General Assembly made decisions to layer another support on top of this correct foundation, it came with accountability requirements that we have to report back. The General Assembly made investments in certain things, opportunity funds, call them all of the things that have been invested in. There's compliance reports that go with them, because to whom much is given, much is expected. So if you think about all of the different, how many funding streams there are that need to be monitored, that we need to have compliance reports for, as those could sunset, hypothetically, maybe in reality, when some of those Band-Aids along the way can sunset because we have a bigger foundation, that does reduce administrative burden. But currently, we can't remove a report or things that are required in code or in law for the investments that have been made till now.
Add to it is I think that there's really great and strong alignment around accountability. Everybody agrees you need to be able to justify the investments made in the system. But I think there's also alignment that we should be looking at accountability around results and not compliance. So I think I'm looking forward to that conversation, how we can build a system where we can point to results rather than just pointing to reports.
Because compliance is inputs, what we want are outputs.
Powerful answers. Thank you so much. And moving on with the next question, how will the proposed changes improve educators' salaries, including disparities across districts?
So importantly, the system retains some stability for educator salaries, which, looking at all of the instability at every level right now, especially at the local level, that has come with the first property reassessment in decades, maintaining that stability is very important, especially when you have such different, again, local dynamics around revenue. But this next part of the conversation, I'm so excited about, because it is the opportunity for us to really address the issue with salary disparities from district to district. We have people who are working hard in districts, even though the district next door, again, there's thousands of dollars of difference. And they're there because they grew up there. They're there because they love that district, because it is their community. And we need to make it possible for the educators who are living, sorry, I'm going to get emotional when I talk about that, because educators love where they work. They are connected to where they work. And we need to provide a system that enables them to stay and serve their communities.
And I'll add on that when we go back to that foundation right at the bottom of the graphic, equalization funding and local tax base funding, really those are the two big pots of money that districts use to fund educator salaries, right? That's the kind of the majority of the money that they have to work with in order to make their contracts competitive and put out a competitive compensation package for all their employees. Equalization has been stagnant and frozen since 2008. Now, that doesn't mean that as new students show up, as new units are generated, districts receive money for those units, but the amount of money they get per unit hasn't changed since 2008. And that's partly because of exclusively because of the broken property assessment data and the stagnation that we saw there. But when that funding stays that stagnant for so long, and then you have communities, as Taylor has mentioned, that even if they doubled their tax rate, they wouldn't generate enough dollars to put a significant increase together for their teachers. When those two pots of money, and then they're relying on their taxpayers to actually support those initiatives and support referendum, that's where we've lost ground. That's where a lot of our districts, especially property poor districts, really have not been able to compete and keep up with some of the wealthier districts across the state, because the two main mechanisms to generate more local dollars or dollars that can be used for local purposes have been stagnant. And really, so that's, the reassessment offers a great opportunity to kind of get that moving again, put more dollars into those property poor districts where we know that even if they were willing to, the amount of wealth that their property tax base has just wouldn't support the needs. But then also, looking at things like referendum reform and how we can offer districts more flexibility in keeping pace with the cost of things as costs go up over time.
Another important question that involves parents is, what do parents need to know or hear in order to be confident in the proposed system?
So parents are already saying they need to see that where the dollars are going, and that the dollars are actually, how is my child going to impact? How is this funding model going to affect my child in the classroom? Are the dollars actually going to the classroom? And so there was a question that you asked previously about the administrative, and there is the administrative burden, but there's also concern from families and from the community in terms of just administrative cost, high level at the leadership level. And so those questions are valid. Parents have those questions, community members have those questions. And so for families, using these opportunities to be able to understand, to better understand the structure of your respective district or charter school, to ask those very difficult questions. What can you show me? Is there an opportunity? Where's the transparency? Am I able to see where the dollars are going? Am I able to see where those dollars are being spent? And then using that as a means to say, okay, so how is this affecting, how will this impact my child? How will this benefit my child moving forward? I think that's important. That transparency and that accountability is important, because in order for families to buy in, or community members to buy into what we're doing, we have to have trust. We have to establish trust with the community. We have to establish trust with families to know that this is well intentioned. We can sit up here, and the commission members, and I know many of the commission members, and I can agree that we may not always agree on the how, but we agree on the what. And the what is that we have to improve the education for our children, and we have to improve educational outcomes for our children. But in order for our community members to buy in and to understand, that we have to build trust, and that comes with the transparency and accountability and opportunities such as this, and the ongoing community engagement sessions, where families have the opportunity to ask those questions directly with commission members, directly with Secretary Martin, and even within their respective districts, to share those concerns and express those concerns and get those questions answered. So I think those are some of the opportunities to address the needs, the concerns of families, the questions of families, but it really centers around establishing that trust with the community.
Thank you so much. Uh, with the next question, could you discuss the impact of these changes on our charter schools?
So from a plan design perspective, charter schools, we have had them at the table, um, and they are basically treated exactly the same under the hybrid model. There are some funding anomalies or inequities that are built into our current system. We're actually using this as an opportunity to correct some of those inequities and put charters on a level playing field in terms of how the state dollars are being allocated through the base funding or the unit count system. Um, so really, they are going to be funded the same way that districts are. I think there are questions on the local side as well. Charters obviously receive local funding from districts, and I think some of the conversation we need to have around the local reform is, what is the right way for charters to continue to receive money on the local side, and what can we do there? Because I know they've expressed some concerns around the instability or lack of transparency that they've often experienced, with not really knowing what's going to be coming from, how much they're going to be getting from the districts that they rely on to provide services for their students. So we want to put them, give them a more stable, consistent way to know that they're getting local dollars. So that's a conversation we're going to have as well.
Thank you. How are additional investments allocations decided for each of the identified student groups and educators?
So I think that goes sort of to the question around the weights in the system. And the system as it's designed at this moment utilizes weights that are basically, informed by some of the best practice and some of the national reports and so forth that we looked at. We also have been working with a national expert consultant from the Learning Policy Institute He has provided the weights that are built into the system now. But again, those are things that need to be evaluated over time to make sure that they are really staying, current and providing an effective level of resources for the populations that they're meant to be assisting.
Moving on with the next question. Is the funding going to be specific to each district and school, or are all schools getting the same funding?
Flows at the beginning, the money flows to the district. Then districts make decisions for how it's allocated to the schools. And the way the way the money is generated for the district is based on the student need, with all the weighted formula. And so then districts have to make decisions at the school board level around if there's a school, if you have 5 schools in your district or 10 or 20, however many schools you have in the district, where did the money that the district received get generated? If one school has a 70% MLL population and another school has a 5% MLL population, the district is not going to take the allocation that they got from the state and give the same amount of money to the school with 70% MLL and 5% MLL. Where there's greater need, there's greater investment. And so those are local decisions. And so school boards, superintendents are already starting to think about where do we make sure we need these investments and how do we want them to flow.
That really makes sense. Thank you. If additional funding is not invested, will the system be different to serve students?
It's a good question, and I don't know that I have the answer isn't, it's speculative at best, right? Could the hybrid model that we are proposing be implemented with the current amount of funding that we have in the system? Yes, technically yes. But we know that we've committed as a commission to having a hold harmless provision, meaning that no district is going to receive less in the new system than it's receiving now. And having a hold harmless with the investments needed to really put the dollars into the higher need areas that they're needed, there does need to be some additional level of investment in order to really increase the investment in the areas that we know that they're necessary. But from a technical standpoint, it could be done, but we would have to kind of violate the hold harmless provision that the commission really has put as a foundation of one of its principles going forward for that stability and that consistency.
I'll just be direct about it. We are looking at an effort that is going to require legislative approval. We're going to need to make the case to legislators across the state to pass this. And I think that recommendation that no one lose, I think that is an essential recommendation in order for us to actually get it done this time, just living in reality. We can't sit in an office and ask a legislator to vote for something that's going to take money away from their constituents. It's just not realistic. So from my perspective as a commissioner, in order to really get this done, I think that we're going to have to look at some additional investment. But I think one of the strengths of this system is you're really looking at streamlining existing funding streams so that we can make the most out of the money in the system already.
And in a clear way, so that transparency exists, where legislators are able to see in the proposed model where the funding is going or intended to go. And I think that's really important as well, because again, as I mentioned previously, with their constituents, they're going to get questions. Their constituents are going to want to know, what their position is on voting for or against the funding model and the reasons why, and opportunities to provide that feedback. So just to Taylor's point, that is also another added benefit of the revised model. And the commission, I think, has been really intentional in trying to think through all of those things to make sure that this eventually comes through fruition. Excuse me.
And the formula doesn't end up being one more box that gets put on top of that house. Like, think about the analogy that I'm trying to put through here, that if it's one more box, a way to get after equity in Delaware that we put on top of the house, we're not solving the problem. So where the money comes from, all of the investments that have been made, hypothetically, theoretically, can be scooped up to put into the foundation box. It's not another box being added on top. All of the different efforts that have been made, all of the money that has been spent, there are dollars in the system already intended for equity. And so the intent with which those dollars were allocated over the last number of years can still be the intent, but it gets put into action through the holistic formula. And so some of those can be sunset and put into the holistic formula.
Thank you very much. And next question, are you including funding for preschool in the proposed formula?
So the the work of the commission has been focused on the K-12 system. I know even though pre-K is funded through our unit count system, we really haven't looked at any changes specific to the pre-K part of our funding system. And I don't if the secretary wants to add more on some of those initiatives, but it hasn't necessarily been a focus of the commission's work.
The governor and the Department of Education are committed to early childhood education through this funding formula. It is a separate conversation, but this is a cradle to career approach, and our vision is the strong, sturdy bridge to kindergarten, and investment is needed there too.
Thank you very much. How adaptable is the formula moving forward as students' needs change or evolve in the future?
I can take that one. I think there is, again, alignment around remaining at the table and making sure that, again, this is not a one and done. If this is, I think Emily says it best. She says, if this is the only thing we do, then shame on all of us collectively. I think there's a lot of talk, and actually one of the recommendations, in addition to the hold harmless, was an establishment of a standing body that would continue to do this work into the future so that we don't get to the point. Nobody wants to get to the point that we are at right now. It is hard work to look at a system built in during the Eisenhower administration and adapt it for today's needs. And if we don't set a structure in place that prevents that from happening, then I think that'll really be a lost opportunity. But I'm grateful that there's alignment around that as well.
Yeah. Could you give an example of how we can streamline existing resources?
Yeah, streamlining the resources, and the secretary just mentioned it as well, that all of these disparate funding streams, in theory, really should be able to be consolidated and collapsed into this new model, because with an added investment that really is necessary, as Taylor has mentioned, we should be able to meet all of the same needs and address the same concerns with added flexibility.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the last question. How can educators and students keep informed with policy for funding throughout the state? Is there an outreach plan to explain to students how funding is being changed?
So I think we mentioned it a few times before, but there are opportunities such as today in the community engagement sessions, thank you, that are taking place, one this evening and then also tomorrow. There will be additional opportunities for community engagement in January. We're planning another one in Newcastle County and one in Western Sussex County in January. And so, but the goal is for there to be, it doesn't stop there. There will be ongoing opportunities for families to participate or community members to participate and to ask those questions and to learn more about the process and provide that feedback as well. And so again, it was the intentionality around ensuring that there were multiple opportunities for community input, and not just multiple opportunities in terms of a place or a time, but even thinking about the demographics and the geographic areas and the needs of the community. And are we responsive in terms of providing this information in multi-languages? We're talking about multi-language learners. And so how are we engaging and providing or organizing our community engagement sessions to invite those communities as well? And so just the intentionality around that is the opportunity for parents and community members to get more information.
And for educators at DSEA, we are really looking at deploying some traditional organizing approaches. We cannot expect our busy members who have lives and a lot of responsibilities to check an email and look at a PowerPoint presentation. We need to go to where they are. And that's what we're doing. We have built out a 10-minute meeting building guide so that in the break room, we can start to have brief, high-level conversations around this is what's going on, this is where you can find more information, and this is how it impacts you and your students. We have to meet people where they are. We can't expect them to come to us. So that's what we're looking to do in order to engage educators across the state.
Our commission meetings are also public. Anyone can join those. To Taylor's point, who has time to join those? We have to do it, and we barely have time, but those are public. But I will turn to Tyler because I think he can answer. I won't put you on the spot now, but he already knows how to get to the students. And as a member of the State Board of Education, you already heard his opening comments today. A student-led initiative to help students understand just the way Taylor's describing, the educators understanding. There's multiple access points, but if we don't go to where students are and have the conversations, host them in a traditional organizing kind of way, I know Tyler has good ideas about how to do that, and he's out and about at the state figuring out ways to bring students into the conversation. There's a part where you just sort of tell them what's happening versus having a conversation so that there's true voice and agency from the student perspective.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Your questions. Wasn't that
Yes.
fabulous? Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Victor. And thank you for all of the great questions. Please continue to submit them and we'll do our best to answer them today or follow up in materials. I will take this time to welcome back Bettina for our next group of panelists on the stage.
Thank you so much. And that was just terrific. What expertise on the stage, what terrific questions from all of you. And wonderful job, Victor, with all the questions. We're going to take a 10-minute break for you to get some coffee, take a brief break, stretch a little bit, and we will start again promptly at 10:35, 9 minutes actually. 10:35, we'll be back on stage. Thank you.
They were very good questions. They weren't. You're right. You saw that. I don't think that you. Those questions were never about. So take, I don't know what you said was recorded. So put an AI. I will take that. Some people don't have time. And they have time. Like, they're fair questions, but we've been answering. This just took a layer deeper to people that are really new. English and shot out now. That looks like you want to do it. It's you're doing great. Hi. Happy holidays. Happy New Year. How are things? Yeah. Okay. No, I'm great. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Great to see you. I'm good. How are you? Good. to see. Thank you so much for saw your campaign for Giving Tuesday. It's great. I was reading about the minimal yards or something. Garden space. Yeah, I tell my kids about it. Do you ever use volunteers? Oh, yeah, it's one of my daughters. Okay. She was back out. She's yeah, she's looking for a job. What is she looking for a job? She makes up oh, okay. That's and she's got marketing. She worked in marketing. Yeah, she did. She experienced how to yeah, yeah. Well, we may be hiring the second half of next year. Yeah, the program. Yeah. Tell her about it. Yeah, I know it's a little bit of ways yet, 6 months is some time, but voluntary. Yeah. Yeah, you want to hear her email? I can put her on our volunteer list too, so she can see when the opportunity is on.
Okay, everybody, I'm going to encourage you to make it back to your tables so we can move on to the next session after that amazing session that we just had. Really excited about the next one. Thank you so much. Brilliant idea for a break. Everyone got to stretch, get some coffee, catch up with all of our friends here. I'm going to ask our panelists to join me up on stage, and so we can get started on our next session, which is building on Delaware's strengths, implementation considerations. So we have a terrific group of panelists, some very familiar to all of you from the last session, and some who we're really welcoming and thrilled to have here in Delaware as well. All right. Thank you so much, everybody. So, and we have with us here today, we have Quabilla Huddleston from Education Trust, Sahava Stadler from New America, Taylor Hawk from DSEA. I almost said Taylor Swift there, Taylor. You must get that a lot. And Emily Falcon, CFO Colonial, we just heard from Taylor and Emily. So I'm going to, in a moment, ask each of you to talk a little bit to introduce yourselves and then briefly share your observations on where Delaware is on school funding. What's different than what we've seen in the past in these discussions? And if you could make a quick introduction of yourselves and then talk about where we are on school funding and what's different than we've seen in the past as we look forward now, building on our strengths and thinking about implementation considerations. So we'll start with you, Quabilla.
Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Quabila Huddleston. I am the policy lead on school funding at the Education Trust. If you are not familiar with the Education Trust, Ed Trust is a national nonprofit organization that advances policies and practices to close opportunity gaps, specifically for students of color, multilingual learners, and students living in poverty. This is now my third equity and education event here in Delaware. And I will say that Delaware is much, much closer towards a more student-centered formula than we were back in 2023 when I was just starting this job and thrown into the fire. So congrats to Delaware for being that much more closer.
Morning, everyone. It's very exciting to be here and be at this point in the conversation. I think that when I first started being engaged in the conversation in Delaware, actually, I worked in Delaware a little over a decade ago, so it's really nice to be back on the ground. I think that one thing that's really important is that this is a whole state conversation. We know that there are some conversations that are focused on particular parts of the state, but that this commission is a broad and inclusive, and 33 people is a lot of representation, so that we've been able, I think, to see the process include priorities from lots of stakeholders, families, students, educators, community members, and that's something that is not always true in every state's funding commission. I've testified before and staffed other funding commissions before, and they're not always as broad and inclusive as this one. And I think it's really key to see this group in this room and the variety of people that are here showing up for this process and how committed you all are to ensuring that this policy moves in a better direction for Delaware students.
And if you'll indulge me for a second, what's different? I feel like I have got a little bit of a surreal situation right here with Zahava Stadler, who's my first boss after grad school. I left Delaware for about 5 minutes, as we do. Went to Jersey City, came right back. You leave, and then it sucks you right back in. And we were talking. I mean, you've really taught me everything that I know about local funding. And I remember looking at the scatter plots of local funding by district and seeing, like, why does Seaford look like this? Why does Laurel look like this? What Cape Henlopen opens up here? And just knowing the context of being able to connect the policy to the context, like to be where we are now versus then is just incredible. And again, I think it's different because we have so many talented people who are at the table and like committed to saying this time has to be different. We can't admire the problem anymore. We have to move. We have people like Emily and Nick there who have experience in multiple districts and levels of government who are digging in and looking at the details. We have strong support from the administration, from DOE, bringing everyone together. We have educators who are, again, talking in their buildings about this, and community members and organizations who are engaging. It's different because it is, I think there is just a shared commitment like I haven't seen before. And I'm very excited about it.
Good morning again, everyone. Emily Falcon. I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer for the Colonial School District, and I have served in a lot of roles prior. I was the finance director at the Department of Ed. I was at the budget office as the education analyst. I've also worked under Governor Minner, and our President Brainerd was one of my first bosses. And I've seen this conversation and been part of this conversation in varying ways over the 20-year career that I have in state government. And I'm not sure I can point to one thing that is different, but the level of engagement, the level of alignment, I think a lot of it is partnerships, relationships, and the commitment to get something done. I know Senator Sturgeon couldn't be here because she's under the weather, but her leadership and commitment to this effort has been tremendous. And, I think she's a big reason why we've made so much progress. But we've also had everyone willing to kind of come in and say, okay, what can we bring to the table that's going to move the conversation forward, rather than everybody sort of taking their, I'm going to take my territorial stance. I don't want to give anything up. I think we've all recognized that we're going to have to make a little bit, everyone has to give a little to move everything forward. And I think we've built some really good partnerships, really good, coalition of support around this effort, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Oh, that's just wonderful, terrific, and I love the idea of not admiring the problem, everyone coming together and giving a bit to really move to implementation and action. And Tyler had called us to action, that commitment, and that to being courageous and continued commitment and that call to action. And you did mention Senator Sturgeon. I do want to recognize that Senator Tizzy Lockman and Senator Dan Cruz are here. I'm really grateful for your attendance here and your continual commitment to education. And please let me know if I've missed any other elected officials who are present here. So thank you so much for joining us. So as Delaware continues to advance and develop this hybrid model, to make it more student-centered, equitable, flexible, everything we heard about in the last session. We'd love to hear from each of you, what you see as opportunities for Delaware. And as we move into discussions with our legislators, what should we keep in mind and what do we need to prioritize and consider? So Quabila, let's start with you on the research and national context. What can Delaware expect from a funding formula that's more student-centered and flexible?
This is a great question. I think there are a couple of fundamental benefits that you all should keep in mind as Delaware moves towards a more student-centered formula. First and foremost, the targeting of resources. I cannot understate that or overemphasize enough how important targeting resources is for student supports and improvements. Just to give you like a real world example, in Maryland is really leveraging its funding formula to target additional resources to students living in poverty. So students there who are identified as living in poverty, they receive additional funding, but districts are also receiving additional funding if they serve a large percentage of students in poverty. And because of this funding, we're seeing specific schools being able to implement community schools, provide additional wraparound supports, additional support staff, invest in evidence-based academic interventions that we know certain student groups need to be able to receive. And so when you have a specific focus of additional resources, you can invest in ways that make a difference. We're also seeing more fair distributions of funding between districts. So California in like 2013 adopted a more student-centered funding formula. And what they're seeing is that districts serving students with greater needs, like students in foster care, multilingual learners, they are actually receiving more state resources. And that's what you want, right? You don't want to just say our formula is designed to do it. You want to actually see those results. And because of some of these additional resources, they are seeing improvements in academic outcomes. Because I know there's a lot of people in this room, you care more about outcomes than you maybe necessarily care about spending more money. And so I want you to know that spending more money can lead to better outcomes, and targeting resources is a great way for us to be able to do that. I won't hug up all the airtime. I know other people can talk about the benefits as well of flexibility, but when we think about the fact that district leaders, they are closest to their students, they know what type of staffing structures can actually support students the most. That is what you get when you move towards a more student-centered, more flexible, and transparent model.
Well, thank you. And picking right up on that with Taylor, can you speak to the benefits for educators, for our teachers, for students? That would be terrific to hear a bit more. I know we heard quite a bit from you, but we know you're
Hey,
always
everyone.
at the ready with a response.
You're going to be sick of hearing me talk. Sorry.
Now we love it. We just love it. Thank you.
As I mentioned before, I think we're really talking about a system that builds on what works and aligns investments in a flexible and targeted way to the students that need additional support. I know we've talked a lot about the opportunity today, but I also don't want to lose that we are at a vulnerable time in public education as well. Under the leadership of our president, sorry to call you out, Stephanie Ingram in the back, we've done, yes, woohoo. We've done a lot of data collection to ask educators, how long are you going to remain in the profession? Are you planning to retire earlier than you might have thought you were. And we're finding out, yes, we're seeing some progress, honestly, thanks to some of the investments in educator pay, where educators are hanging on longer. And we are seeing boosts thanks to, I think, the strategic investments at the Department of Ed and their partnership in increasing the teacher pipeline. But that I don't want to lose that we're at a vulnerable place and we have shortages across the state. We have paras who are stepping in to fill vacancies all across the state. So if we don't maintain a district's and a school's ability to, at a minimum, keep those core staff, there's real risk in that. But at the same time, educators have diverse needs. And they really are, they're all different. And despite the incredible workload that they have, they are all motivated to continue their learning in order to support their students. And I think by unlocking this flexibility, we're going to be able to offer not only the tailored supports that students need, but the tailored supports that educators need, so that they can really lean into their expertise. They can pursue the training and development that really will help them serve their students best. So I think it's balancing the stability that's needed, especially during this critical time, with the flexibility that'll really enable them to increase test scores and increase achievement, so that we can make sure that we're seeing, again, the improvements and the results that we all want to see.
So do you see, Taylor, that increased flexibility is also helping to drive and support increased retention?
It can. It absolutely can. It can, as long as educators, community members remain at the table and make sure that the flexibility, the additional freedom comes with, again, that accountability, so that the money is spent in the way that we know will have the most impact.
Great comment about that vulnerability. And and thanks for calling out, Stephanie. Really terrific to do that. Okay, so Emily, as a district leader, what are you considering you'll be able to do differently when this formula is adopted?
I mean, I think first and foremost, with the added investment, I think, I constantly feel like I've got a king size bed and a queen size comforter, right? I can't ever get the resources to cover the entire need. And hopefully we're going to be able to invest in a king size comforter, right? So I won't have to make as many difficult decisions about where the resources need to be put. But I also think that this changing the system itself gives us a really good opportunity to change the conversation at the state level as well. Because in my 20 years of experience, I've seen that Delaware is trying to legislate excellence in its education system. And a very smart woman from California told me, you can't do that. So giving us the flexibility with the added resources and the focusing on results. I love the focus on results, not on reports. When that happens and we can actually have the resources we need to give teachers what they need to support their students, sky's the limit. And I think the conversation can really change. And there's also a lot of other education issues in Delaware that need attention. And the funding reform conversation has sort of clogged up the bandwidth for a very long time. So putting a new funding system in place is also hopefully going to let us, put that in place. And yes, it does need continued focus, and we need to make sure that it doesn't get stagnant. But maybe we can move on to some of the other, bigger issues that Delaware has to tackle with education.
Right, create some airspace and some capacity for those conversations as well. Great point. Zahava, can you give us a sense of what some other states have done or things that you've seen with their formulas, and what we should prioritize and consider going forward?
When I think about the recent reforms that have happened around the country, so some of them, I would emphasize some of the same things that Quabila did earlier, an increased focus not only on individual low-income students, but on districts and schools that are supporting especially high numbers of those students, additional investments in the education of multilingual learners, especially as the knowledge around how best to support those students evolves, so does our way of funding those supports. And we're seeing other states also move to a tiered system where students with different proficiency levels in English get supported with different levels of resources. So I appreciate that you all came here for a weedsy conversation this morning. I know this is quite wonky, but I appreciate the wonkiness of the questions that the previous panel got. So I know you're with me. I would say other things that have happened, generally there's been move to emphasize things in addition to teacher salaries. There's been, regardless of what else you put in a funding formula, 80+% of school district expenditures are going to be on staff. Education is a people business. But adding elements to the funding formula that push districts to focus on specific students and specific kinds of program supports. So opportunity funding has started that conversation in Delaware, and additional investment in those directions would be in line with what other states are seeing. I'll just also say, states have also started to get creative around local taxes. Sometimes that's part of a funding reform conversation. Sometimes it's treated as a separate conversation. Colorado has done some important work recently on improving the equity of their local revenue system. Montana has implemented a county level tax pool so that not only individual districts, but actually whole counties can share some of those revenues and smooth out some of those differences between districts in the same county. So there has been a lot of innovation there. I just also would say one more thing about recent reforms, and the Secretary mentioned earlier that that the state is looking at a hold harmless provision to help the state transition to a new system. It's really important to give districts an on-ramp and time to understand how their system may have to adjust to a new system. That different states have taken different paths here, and the ones that have seen the most success at bringing about a fairer, more effective system have had a hold harmless that phases out slowly over time to give districts that kind of transition, but without locking in old problems with a hold harmless that lasts forever. And so that kind of balance between stability and transition and allowing room for the change we're trying to make is really important in constructing that hold harmless policy.
Interesting, using a glide path, I guess, to make that transition. Really, really great insights. Thank you so much. Emily, as you conduct the public information sessions, can you talk about the questions that you're getting and insights you can share based on those questions?
Sure. We've had great engagement through the public sessions that we've done so far, and I think all of the questions boil down to one big issue, which is how am I going to know that my kid, my community, or me as a teacher is going to get more of what I need out of this new system? And the easiest answer, is what I think I've been saying, all along this morning, is that the added resources coupled with the flexibility for districts to make the best decisions for their kids and their communities is really where that needs to be, right? Because we could very easily fall back into the trap of, well, every school needs this, every school needs that, and you winnow away at the flexibility of districts to be able to actually provide what their schools need. Because in some areas, that resource that is held sacred by one group really isn't a priority or isn't necessary, or it's being handled in a different way in certain areas. So really focusing on how the system gives that flexibility and really moves the conversation back to the local level so that district leaders are engaging with their communities to better understand, what and better understand. I think we all, as district leaders, have a really good understanding of what our communities need. That is what we're there to do. But this is going to give us the resources to meet those needs in more effective ways. And I think that's the best way to answer that question, right? Is how am I going to know that my whatever perspective I'm bringing as a taxpayer, am I getting my bang for my buck as a student, as a parent? And you've got to engage at the local level. You've got to talk to your district leaders about what you see as valuable for your school and your community.
So I'm taking this analogy of the king size comforter for the king size bed as the additional resources. I don't know what the analogy is for that local flexibility, but I'm sure we can come up with something too.
Right. The pattern and the color, right? That's where the local funding
That fits your school, and
right.
and for parents and to be assured that they're going to have that have those decision rights and that input. That's so just love that. Okay, so Taylor, what do you think the policymakers and advocates need to know or understand about how we'll support our schools, the right approach for Delaware now, especially as we're looking at a legislative session coming up?
I think it's the right approach. And one point that I don't think has been made yet is because it's a system that's building on what works, we are looking at implementing this system rather quickly. There's really not this like 5-year runway to get to increased targeted investments. And I think that's a real strength of the approach. We're also, again, looking at, and I probably mentioned this already, repurposing existing investments, which I know policymakers love to hear. They, especially those that sit in the Joint Finance Committee, there are a lot of competing priorities. The more we can look at existing funds, making sure they're at their highest and best use, I think the stronger case we'll have. And I also want to emphasize, and I can't emphasize this enough, that this is the right approach, especially considering the moment that we're in. And the moment that we're in regarding local instability. And I will continue to talk about that over and over again. We are dealing with a lot of public anger around local taxes and a lot of misinformation. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to my own grandmother about you do not live in a district that took the 10% increase. That's not why your taxes went up. It is not the school district getting an influx of funds. And she has supported every referendum in her district. But that level of public discomfort really calls for us to be strategic and long-term in building a system that works. So I think that we are not only taking a look at all of the different levels at once, I think, which is also a new part of the conversation. We're talking about local, we're talking about state, we're talking about how it works together, and we're building that on-ramp so that we don't create unintended consequences as a result of the transition to moving towards a more forward-looking system.
Great, thank you. Kwabila and Zahava, you've both been involved in funding reforms in other states. So as we move into implementation, what challenges should we anticipate? Like, let's be prepared. What do you see as potential barriers or roadblocks or challenges from lessons that you've learned from seeing around the country?
Yes. So a point of note, this has come up about this idea, like, can we transition to the formula without new investment? The answer is yes. However, most states that have reformed their formulas, right, moved towards a more student-centered formula within the last 5 years, they did increase public investment, right? So in Tennessee, they provided $1 billion investment. In Alabama, this school year, they invested an additional $166 million. And over the course of the next 3 years, they're planning to invest nearly $500 million in their new formula. So Delaware doesn't have to necessarily follow those steps, but I think if you think about your priorities of improving student outcomes and targeting resources, you'll be able to do that more if you do invest additionally, but also invest strategically. So keep that in mind. I think something else that we're seeing in some of our states that we've helped move towards a more student-centered formula is that this is not a one and done. And I think this was said, right? We don't just pass a policy and then forget about it the next day. We have to continue to educate ourselves and each other. In Tennessee, our partners, our team there is really focused on continuing to educate existing legislators, but also newly elected legislators, right? And reminding folks of the what and the why of the new formula, because there's so many competing issues in education that it's easy to just forget why we move to this new formula. And so there is going to need to be that ongoing community engagement that was mentioned earlier. Forever, I would say forever. And then lastly, there is going to be an adjustment period here, right? This is not an overnight situation. Delaware has had its formula for 80 years. That's a long time. So we should expect that, it's going to take district leaders time to adjust. It's going to take the state time to adjust. And so be patient, I would say, because when you lack patience, you risk ruining all of the hard work that you just did. And then, in terms of whether or not you want to hit the, gas pedal or you want to slowly do this, you have options, right? I do think it comes down to your intentions, your priorities, and your political will. And your neighbor, Maryland, is taking about 10 years to fully phase in its comprehensive student funding formula. Tennessee took about a year between when they passed the policy and when they implemented. So you have options. I would ask you to consider the fact that the longer you take to make this change, the longer your students have to wait, and the longer your students are going to, be without what they need. So
You're,
I'll
you're
leave you with
reminding
that.
me of Tyler's comments at the outset of this meeting. So great last point there. Zahava?
I'll just say we've talked a lot about the increased flexibility of this formula, and that poses a real opportunity for good implementation. It also means that people who have been approaching budgeting at the local level the same way for a long time may not instinctively take advantage of all that flexibility. So, when Tennessee moved away from its old formula to something more student-centered and flexible, they put out a state contract to say who can help us support our superintendents, our CFOs, and our school boards at doing this well. Because I'm not sure that contract produced the world's best training, but I think you all could improve on that. That ultimately the local decision makers, where the rubber meets the road, are going to need their support, encouragement, and accountability for doing new things with new money, right? If we want students to have a new experience, we have to spend our new resources in new ways. I think that's intuitive, but it's also hard to do when you have to make everything fit in your spreadsheet and make sure that the lights turn on Monday morning and every classroom has a teacher in front of it. There are things that you must do that you have always done. And helping people to also do the new things is really challenging, and it's something that the state needs to take on in implementation. I think people have also talked a lot about making sure this isn't a one and done process and coming back to the table. I just want to say you're already doing that. It's been about 5 years since the lawsuit settlement that led to the birth of opportunity funding. And the committed advocates in this room and throughout the state, the parents, the students, the teachers, the community members said, yes, and thank you. And we're going to keep pushing for the next better thing. You have already proven as a state that that is how you're approaching this issue. And I am really heartened by that. And I encourage you all to keep that going because I think it's something that in implementation, it's very easy in some states to say, we did this really hard thing. We're tired. Let's not do this again for a while. But at the same time, there are some states that have a standing body that is charged with overseeing funding formula implementation. Maryland put in place an accountability and implementation board to oversee its new reform. Louisiana has long had a standing body to recommend changes to its formula. Hawaii has a standing body to recommend changes to its formula. There are also states that have norms or legislative requirements to re-examine the formula at a particular cadence. So Massachusetts, Vermont, Wyoming, Idaho, across the country, across the political spectrum, there are states that recognize that this needs to be an evolving policy to support an evolving student population.
A great point. And Taylor, you talked about that earlier, the need for continuous commitment and dialogue and a body to continue this work. Great call out, especially around this is a multi-stage process, but we're not just at the very beginning. We have been doing this work for some time, and that work will continue. We may not get everything right the first time, but we are committed to doing it, and we are in. We're not at the very beginning. We've reviewed where the PEFC is related to state share hybrid recommendations. Emily had mentioned a few topics that are still ahead. Taylor, can you talk about what you've been hearing from members in terms of the issues that need to be tackled, such as local funding inequity or other issues?
Absolutely. We've been talking about it. We've been feeling it in districts across the state. Local funding inequity is really driving disparities up and down the state. I mentioned salary differences. I'm hearing from from educators in the highest paid districts, they do not want their fellow educators to be making thousands of dollars less than them. The amount of solidarity that I've seen from educators across districts around ongoing issues in districts like Smyrna, not to call them out, but really they are joining together and saying these differences and these disparities are unacceptable. And educators, again, should be allowed to live in and work in the communities they are deeply connected to. So that equalization, I think, will be critical. And again, to speak to the moment that we're in, I mentioned somebody in the room that during the reassessment hearing yesterday, I heard the Farm Bureau representative say school funding equalization. I have never heard that before. I have never heard school funding equalization mentioned in non-education rooms. So we have this opportunity again to make these big, bold changes related to local revenue. But at the same time, a lot of the other topics that were discussed in that room really talked about certain tax breaks, certain different taxing certain structures less or more than others. And I think we need to make sure that as education advocates, we are remaining connected to those conversations around reassessment and local tax reform, because they will absolutely impact the amount of revenue that our districts are able to draw from. We cannot Swiss cheese our tax base without building a system that again, provides and makes sure that we're both creating a system that has those economic development incentives, but doesn't unduly burden our school districts in the process.
Emily?
Yeah, thank you for letting me jump in. I think, what we've seen with the reassessment process is that Delaware's policy muscles, right, around dealing with property tax policy are very anemic. We have not had really to do any sort of property tax policy at the statewide level for 40 years, because everyone just kept on with their property values from the 1980s, and in Sussex it was the 70s. So it was just sort of, it is what it is, and everybody keeps moving on. And good on you if you can get a referendum passed. The policy considerations that, how all of the policy considerations are tackled, what individual property owner relief or, circuit breakers, as they were called a couple hearings ago, those need to be incorporated, but we need to stay at the table as districts and charters so that the funding that we're receiving isn't interrupted in ways that make the progress we're making on these state reforms unsustainable or unpartnered with, local blips, where, now we've got all this new tax policy, and as a result, our local funding streams have gone haywire, right? So we need to stay at the table as policymakers and the General Assembly tackle the issues that have surfaced with reassessment, to make sure that, we keep working in partnership and in concert so that everyone can see the benefit of everything that's happening, both on the education side, but also on the tax policy side.
Yeah, well said, and essential to having that stable foundation that we've heard about all morning. So as far as other topics that Delaware should consider taking on related to school funding, Zahava or Kwabila, do you want to speak to that? And don't forget to submit questions. We will be tackling questions. They were fantastic questions in the last session. I expect nothing less from all of you in this one.
So there's been a lot of talk today about equalization. I want to tell you that as somebody who deals with this topic in multiple states, that when Delaware people say equalization, they mean something different than anybody else when they see equalization. So I want to be clear about what we might want to revisit, and it's thinking entirely differently about this question. What equalization means in most states is You have an allocation formula that says, okay, given your students, given your district conditions, given your needs, we, the state, think you need X. Whatever $1 million. Now, we expect everybody to raise a Y% property tax, right? A 1% property tax. Okay, that's going to raise a lot more in Cesar Rodney than it does in Laurel. The state would recognize that and say, we have your target from the formula. We're going to subtract the value of a 1% property tax in your own district, and the state will give you the balance. So there is a burden sharing, a responsibility, a specific target that the district is asked to hit. And then the state will make sure that that tax effort yields what the state thinks the district actually needs. That's what everyone else thinks equalization means, right? Delaware thinks equalization is a nice little Division 3 icing on the cake, but it's not a fundamental rebalancing of resources. Taylor mentioned earlier that the local share of teacher salaries, what districts are able to muster, is so different from place to place. Great. The state share is also different. When you look at the distribution of salary dollars from the state to different districts, the state is actually giving more salary money to higher income school districts right now. Not in every single instance, but the trend line is clear. Because there is no fundamental rebalancing happening in the equation. So when the state goes back to the question of equalization, I want to encourage you all not to just think of it as a little bit of seasoning that's sprinkled on top of the formula, but as a fundamental part of how we all come together as communities of different tax capacities to support our students, and how we can do that as a state and not just ask districts to go it alone. So I think that is really, really important. I think the other thing to say is we've had a little bit of talk about accountability. There is a question sometimes as to how do we know we got it right? We made all these new investments and we said that students with this need that much more money. How do we know we got it right? The way you know is by being transparent about your student outcomes and saying, we're going to hold not just districts accountable, but we're also going to hold the legislature accountable for those outcomes. We're going to say, did the money that you provided do enough to support those students? And so accountability flows in all directions. The transparency supports the community holding the district accountable, but also the community in the district holding the legislature accountable. And that's another future priority to think about. Do we have the transparency we need to either know we got it right or know what we have to revisit in the next round?
Yes, and as if Delaware didn't already have enough on its plate, there are several other things that I think you all should consider. So pivoting here a little bit, number one, how you are identifying the students that you are trying to target additional supports to should be top of mind, right? So the recent federal bill, right, the One Big Beautiful Bill, OBA, is making significant changes, right, to federal programs such as Medicaid and SNAP. And many states rely on that data to identify students living in poverty or for free or reduced lunch. And so you all should be thinking about not only just like how much money you're trying to get to students, but like how are you actually identifying those students for those additional supports. Another thing that was discussed earlier, this idea of concentrated poverty. I think you all are starting to have this conversation that it's not just enough to provide additional resources for individual students, but that once a district hits a certain threshold of students living in poverty, they are facing considerably more challenges in meeting all of their students' needs. And so we do see several states not only just funding individual students living in poverty, but they're funding districts for reaching a certain threshold, let's say 55% students eligible for free or reduced lunch. Some states it's even higher, like 70%. So that is something for Delaware to contend with, because certain communities are, for lack of a better term, more burdened when it comes to the resources that they need to provide. Zahaba mentioned this earlier, making sure you're tiering your supports for multilingual learners. A student that is a newcomer to the country has very different needs than a student who's maybe been in English language programming for several years, but still hasn't yet mastered the language. And so it's great that, we're going to target additional resources to multilingual learners, but also consider varying that funding so that you can really support all of those students. And then to Zahaba's point about accountability and transparency, I'll just say, focus on strong accountability and transparency, but do so in a way that is designed to support, not punish districts. Because if you move towards punishing districts, we're not going to reach our goal of supporting all students. There has to be a balance between holding our districts accountable, but also supporting them in getting the job done.
What strong guidance as we go forward from both of you. Thank you so much. And I know we've captured all of this, and we'll be really mindful as we think about some of those kind of warnings and roadblocks and potential speed bumps and considerations as we go forward in implementation. So finally, we know that the PEFC is working on community engagement meetings. We heard about some today. And we know that making sure the community is involved is, as always, important throughout this process. How can we help communicate the benefits of this to the broader public? And you mentioned, we've heard earlier, there's some misinformation out there. How can we get the benefits of this important work out to the broader public? Kwabila?
Number one, make this updated model real for various stakeholders. Provide as many community engagement opportunities as possible. Just when you think you've had enough, add more. Just to give you an example, in Tennessee, when Tennessee was, our Tennessee office was, working towards updating its model, they launched a dollars and cents series to help break down what was wrong with the then formula and then where the state could go. And then through our Southerners for Fair School Funding initiative that I helped them launch, we also supported our partners in Alabama launch their own version of this, which they called Every Dollar Counts, where basically they just provided information on what was wrong with the formula and then where we could go. And there were various types of folks who attended this, everyone from parents to district leaders to CFOs, to legislators. It was really a diverse group of people that were tuning in. We also engaged deeply with the education committees in some of these states, governor offices, and we really did focus on building a big tent across party lines because while, people may have not agreed on like the how, everyone knew that what was happening was not working for students. And so I think that as you all move towards, legislation to codify your new formula, really focus on that big tent and how you all can talk to each other about why we need to do this work.
Thank you. Sahaba?
Well, I'm happy to endorse everything that Kwabila just said. I'll just add an additional note on framing. I think, and I'm very guilty of this as somebody whose whole job is school funding policy, I think we often, when we want to talk to people about school funding policy, we start out by talking about school funding policy. This is a problem because nobody experiences their challenges with the school system as a school funding policy problem. Nobody walks in and says, my child is not benefiting from a tiered multilingual learner supported weight. Nobody says that, right? What they say is, my child's teacher doesn't have a bilingual para. My child's teacher is using Google Translate to get by in the classroom. That's what they know. And I think when we start, we need to start with the community experience and what students and educators and parents know, not just about problems, but also about their aspirations for the school system. What do they want it to do for them? What do you want it to do for you? Because if I come in and tell you, compared to other states, here's where Delaware is falling short of school funding best practices, that is, I don't think that's a way to get you to come along with me. But I think that if I hear from you that, I'm not saying this is true, but hypothetically, the CTE offerings in my district are outdated. I don't think they're helping me get ready for the workforce of today. And I don't know what I'm going to do after high school. And apparently neither do you, right? If you hear that from a student, that the advocates and policy folks in the room need to be able to connect the dots from that experience to the necessary policy. And I'm not saying that work hasn't been done in the commission, but I don't think that's how people necessarily always hear about the change. They need to know that the proposal is responsive to their experience, their aspirations, their challenges in the school system. So that's really key. I also think that as we move towards this more flexible system, we all have very recent experience of unusually flexible school funding, and that's COVID relief. So I know we all want to memory hole COVID and never think about it again. And I want to shout out Superintendent Green, who I actually interviewed about Red Clay's COVID funding experience for a report on this a couple years ago, that Delaware administrators were given the most flexibility they maybe had ever had with a pot of money and said, how do you want to use this? Do you want to use it for tutoring? Do you want to use it for HVAC repair? Nobody had ever said, do you want to use this dollar for tutoring or for HVAC repair? That's not a thing that anyone had ever been able to do before. And I think that there are districts and communities that can point to great experiences that they had with investments that they made in staff, in programming, in instructional materials, as well as in things like, contact tracing trees and desk shields. But really strong experiences that they had with flexible dollars that the community will remember and say, it was really a shame when that had to go away. I wish we still had the capacity to make that decision with our money. And this new formula can help us do that. I think that's a really important message that people can hear.
It goes to that comforter that's got the different patterns and everything. I like that. All right, Taylor, your thoughts on this?
Yes, and as I mentioned, we're really looking to meet educators where they are, make this real for them, talk about how this is going to improve their classroom and working conditions. But in addition to active educators, we're also really lucky to represent a great group of retired educators who I had the opportunity to sit with and do some message testing with yesterday. And one of our incredible retired educators she's like, I'm no longer working in the system. I don't have kids in the system, but somebody's going to need to take care of me. I'm going to need high quality nurses and doctors. And I also want to live in a strong, thriving community. So we need to figure out a way to communicate the value of this to even people who are not in the system. And it has to be different messages. But at the same time, as a person who has a lot of friends with young children, I am sick and tired of hearing people that I know move across the line. I'm sick of it. I want the people that I grew up with to stay and raise their families in Delaware. That is important to me, not only as a lifelong Delawarean who again left for like 5 minutes and came back, but I think it's also, again, an economic imperative for the state of Delaware. We need to figure out how to recruit and retain young families. It's just essential. It's essential to making sure we can have a thriving economy. So there are so many different messages, but I think that there's also so much buy-in. There should be buy-in at every level from our industry partners, from our classroom teachers. They have a different stake in the game, but we can all benefit from a high quality, strong school funding system.
Well said. Our employers need to be able to attract the best employees to our state, and having a strong education system is a key part of that, so that people are staying on this side of the line, to your point. Emily?
Pardon me. I think that the coalition that we have brought together with this particular effort, where we have district representation, we have that broad group of stakeholders that Midra mentioned on the last panel. There is so much infrastructure already embedded in Delaware communities talking about education, talking about this very thing, right? How do we improve education? We need to tap into that infrastructure and make sure that those groups are aligned with what we're doing on the funding commission, excuse me. And this goes even into districts. Every single district, every single charter school has to have a budget committee that is providing transparency in how we're managing our current funding and our current finances to our community. we need to figure out how to get this conversation to those meetings, right? School board meetings. We have the infrastructure to broaden the message and to pull more people in who, are the folks that, as Zahava mentioned, they've got their particular issue and they're not coming at it from I want to engage in school funding reform. They're seeing my kid's not getting what they need, or there's some problem that, my school hasn't been able to tackle yet. We do need to meet them where they are. And I think there's a lot of infrastructure in Delaware already that we just need to better leverage to pull into this conversation.
And have the right messaging and communication around the benefits. Well, very well said. So before we move on to the Q&A, any final thoughts? Anything? Anyone has a burning desire to share? Not that you've talked a lot, you've talked a lot already today, but any final thoughts before the Q&A? All righty. Well, let's move on to that. I know that Victor Medellin from Aspire will be sharing questions from the audience. Here's an extra one. All right, Victor, why don't you stand up so everyone can see you? Terrific.
Thank you, Ms. Bettina. Okay, so with the first question, as we increase flexibility, what will the reporting and accountability system look like? Which states are doing a good job reporting how dollars are being spent and getting results?
I'll just speak to the second part of that question because I think that there probably isn't a decided answer to the first part of the question. Though if anybody has other information, please correct me. So 10 years ago, the federal government passed a revision to the big federal education law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, and required that schools start reporting, that everybody's report at the school level what was being spent. And some states did this with the bare minimum of box checking, and some states really embraced this as an opportunity to show transparently how they were using money. And so in the best case, that can be linked to your school report cards, which you also had to do that show how your school is doing. And so I would say a state like Illinois, for instance, had a really robust approach to reporting where and how money was being used and linking that to the outcomes of students in that school building. So there's precedent out there, and there's a requirement out there already that we can embrace in a more robust way.
Just to add, I think in terms of like what it could look like in Delaware, it doesn't look like 300 PDF reports. It looks like user-friendly, like I can, hop on a computer and sit down with my granny and show her like a simple graph, right? So I think there needs to be varying levels of detail that there's information that we share with the legislature and budget staff, and then there's things that your average Delawarean can understand and process.
That
And
goes to the last discussion around how we communicate the benefits to the broader public.
And I'll just add something I don't want it to look like. I don't want it to look like our students being reduced to a single score. And if we are going to reduce our students to a single score, it better tell me that what they're able to do. And I don't believe we have a single score that we can directly translate into what our students are capable of. And I think that as we talk about accountability, we should talk to families and communities about what results they want to see, what success looks like for them. Is it job placement rates? Is it school climate? I think we need to think creatively around what are actually the goals of our school funding system. What are we trying to accomplish as a state and as a community, and align the accountability system to that and those goals.
Thank you. Victor?
So much. Coming up with the next question, how will these reforms impact the ability for schools to update their facilities and maintain larger and more modern facilities?
I'll jump in with that one. So, as I think I mentioned in the first panel, this does not represent a change in how construction funding or major capital funding is being allocated or addressed. It is a need in the state. Basically, the state is supposed to fund a certain percentage of construction projects. depending on the property wealth of the district. And in a lot of cases, the state does not have enough resources coming into the bond bill and the revenue process in order to adequately meet the need of the districts that have put forward those requests. That does need to be looked at. We need to figure out a better, more equitable way to allow for school construction, because right now we do have a dynamic where, because of the shortfall, because of the budget pressures, pretty much the only places that are getting funding are where there's enrollment growth pressure, right? So districts where they have a lot of new schools, they're getting more money because they're seeing enrollment increases. A lot of schools that have very, very old infrastructure have trouble getting enough money to maintain those facilities because they don't see that enrollment growth. And that is an equity issue. But unfortunately, the model that we've put forward in the Funding Commission so far can't really address that, because ultimately it is basically a revenue issue at the state level that is causing that shortfall.
Another opportunity going forward. All right, another question, Victor?
Yes, of course. The next question says, does the Funding Commission support any of the Reading consortium proposals, and how do the recommendations intersect?
I'll try, and then if I mess it up, please let me know, because I know Emily is also involved in the Reading Consortium as well. I think that we're looking to build a system that is able to adapt to whatever the Reading Consortium decides. I don't think that we can build a system that only works with one of the options. So that's how I think it intersects, is that we're building a system that hopefully will complement, but also isn't so connected that we have to wait for them to pick a particular option in order for the system to work.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think our system right now funds kids where they're showing up to school, and the hybrid model, doubles down on those investments and moves resources to where kids are for high need and multilingual learners. So if they remain in one district, they're going to receive the funding in the hybrid model. If they're moved to a different district due to Reading, they're going to receive the same allocation from the hybrid model as it's designed right now. So it really does have that flexibility to really handle whatever governance structure or whatever district boundary lines look like going forward.
Great, thank you.
Much, Miss Emily. Next question is, how are we taking into account shifting age demographics in our state as it relates to enrollment, staffing, and financing?
Right, this picks up on the point you made, Taylor, about needing healthcare workers. I am from the healthcare industry, to take care of everybody as they get older. But shifting aging demographics.
Yes, I mean, I think that we're looking to, I think somebody used the phrase reset the equilibrium in Delaware with this funding system. We need to make sure, again, we are attracting and retaining young families to work here so that we're able to support Delawareans of all ages. And I know there was a part of the question about shifting enrollment. I'm really excited to get to the student count part of the conversation. The way that we count students right now, talk to a school secretary about what our unit count days look like. I am excited to talk about a system that better tracks shifts in enrollment, make sure districts are able to get the funding they need for students as they exist in their buildings. And I think we have a lot of opportunity there on facilities. Again, we're locking in, and we have a long list of things to do even after this, I think, pretty historic, monumental step forward.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Next question is, are unit count ratios being evaluated as part of the reforms?
As it stands right now, the model doesn't have any changes to the unit count ratios. But again, I think the commitment that the commission has made is that this cannot be we're not putting a stake in the ground and saying, it's perfect, it's done, don't touch it. It needs to be a living, breathing system that is constantly maintained. And I know everyone mentions that it's 80 years old. It has been modified over time, right? It was changed about 15 years ago to recognize student special ed status in the unit count structure. Before that, it was, based on categorical disabilities. And so we modified it and made improvements. We've enhanced unit funding for pre-K. We've enhanced or recognized that, K-3 students need a lower ratio in those critical early years. So we've been able to do those changes. But because the rest of the system needed so much overhaul, we really haven't focused on shifting any of those ratios in this current iteration.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Emily. That being said, how can we embed equity in a unit-based system?
I think that we're looking at a system that embeds equity into the unit-based system. Again, we're talking, it's not, I wouldn't call it a unit-based system though. We're talking about a hybrid system where equity is a part of the main funding formula. So I think that we should continue to talk about how we can make sure that equity is a part of every single component of the funding system. But I do believe, again, that is that is the North Star. Equity is we have a lot of great unifying principles, but if I have to pick the most important one, it's that one. So I think that we have designed a system that keeps equity into the main funding formula. And again, like as we mentioned earlier with the results, just expands the amount of target dedicated funding to a really significant level that we've never seen in Delaware before.
I'll just add, I think, two things. One, we talked a lot about the lack of fundamental equalization in the core parts of the formula, like the unit count. Right now, as it stands, higher income districts are able to build upon the units they receive with significantly more local funding. Part of the way to embed more equity in the money that districts have for staff is to take better account of differences in local tax capacity in that formula. Another thing I'll say, without getting myself into too much trouble, hopefully, is that even states that use teacher units elsewhere in the country do not generally do what Delaware does in aligning the value of the teacher unit to a set salary schedule. Generally speaking, and not very many states still use a unit count formula. It's fairly old-fashioned, but that even in states that have maintained it, there's often an average or standardized unit value rather than one aligned to the individual teacher that the district can manage to hire. I think that there is reason to be concerned that aligning unit funding to the salary schedule rewards the districts that have the easiest time attracting and retaining experienced and credentialed teachers. And I think we know which districts have the easiest time doing that and which districts struggle to do that. And for the state to reward that ease with more money is an equity concern that I would encourage people to not lose sight of, even if it's not something to tackle in this iteration.
So I'll jump in, and I think the data showing that high wealth or higher wealth districts in Delaware are commanding higher teacher salaries. I can't dispute the data, but I can dispute the reason for it. I fundamentally believe that it is a byproduct of the brokenness of our system and the frozen funding and the lack of equalization changes, the lack of referendum reform, right? So we are, I think Taylor mentioned this on the previous panel. School districts are the only way that Delaware taxpayers have an up or down, yes or no vote on whether or not they're going to pay more to the state in some way. So any grievances that anybody has, whether it's with the education system directly or even sometimes with the government writ large, taxpayers take it out on us when we go to referendum and ask for their support in paying more taxes. That can become a really difficult thing for taxpayers to wrap their minds around. And I think it's a combination of the reassessment stagnation and the referendum process that has over time led to those the shifting of teacher migration that has moved good, talented teachers away from districts that are frankly able to pay less. That is a problem. That is something that we all as districts want to address. We want equity for our teachers, but it is a byproduct of other broken parts of the system rather than something that the unit count automatically or the unit process automatically embeds into the system, because it can be fixed if other parts of the funding system are put back on a more stronger footing.
Great question. And we've heard a few perspectives on it. So really prerogative. Thank you. Keep going, Victor.
Thank you
We
so
have a
much,
couple
Ms.
more
Emily.
minutes.
As we look to a new accountability system, can the financial review process that charters use today be used for all schools?
So I see Kendall in the back wanting to answer. I'm not as super familiar.
Could you repeat the question and then identify who you are and get a microphone? Victor, can you share your microphone, please?
Hi, I'm Kendall Massett, Executive Director for the Delaware Charter Schools Network. 14 years ago, the Governors Association, DSCA, DOE, School Boards Association, superintendents, Rodell, and others sat in a room and created an accountability system for charter schools based on many things, but financial being one of them, tied to academics and organizational. I'm going to look at the experts here from the national level and say, could an existing accountability system, or should an existing accountability system that's already located in the state be considered as what we use moving forward?
I don't want to presume to know in any great detail what the system looks like, so I'm not going to endorse or dispute the value of applying it across traditional district schools. I think that there is, as I said earlier, with the example of Illinois as having a strong and robust reporting system around spending and student outcomes, I think that there is a value in looking at models that already exist and that are succeeding, rather than reinventing the wheel. Whether this is that model, I'm not in a position to say. But I think that part of the way to answer the question is, do parents feel that the current model enables them to make good decisions for their child? And do legislators feel like they understand whether or not a particular school is yielding the results that they want to see? Does the community feel that that system is telling them what they need to know? I think the people who pay attention to it can tell you whether it's working.
And I'll just add, I was involved in some work around improving transparency and accountability for the charter sector in DC. And it was, as you can imagine, a pretty vicious debate between the sectors. But ultimately, where they landed is trying to create, a financial accounting system that allowed parents who are, they have children in traditional schools, they have children in charter schools, to make reasonable comparisons between the two sectors. And so I would just invite Delaware to think about, like, what are you trying to accomplish with these accountability systems, and what are you hoping to be able to say, like, about the system separately but also together?
And I know I wasn't asked this question, but I'm going to jump in anyway, because the organization that I represent was mentioned. Bring it to the table. Bring the 14-year-old model to the table and let's talk about it. I can't speak for what happened 14 years ago. I was in high school. I wasn't around. But one thing that I really want to make sure doesn't happen in the future is that we don't get stuck in 14-year-old conversations and 14-year-old dynamics that have held us back from making progress. So let's bring things to the table. Let's break out of our old silos and let's build something that works in 2025.
Okay. Time for one final question. Victor,
Thank you so
Have at it.
much. So for our last question says, in states that have invested in student needs, what have been the outcomes and what measures are used?
Well, earlier I talked about some of the results out of California. They're not perfect, by the way. I'm not, saying that by any means, but in California, they did see improvements in reading and test scores as well as high school graduation rates, particularly around what they call concentration grants, which is again just giving districts additional money for the fact that they serve. I believe the threshold is 55% free reduced price lunch. So that is significant. Importantly, they saw this improvement in outcomes about 4 years after implementation.
Good point.
So again, you can have a student, let's say Delaware updates its formula, student enters, kindergarten, the more years they're exposed to better targeted funding, the better the outcomes can be.
Which goes to your point about the time being now, and the longer it takes us to implement, the longer it'll take for those benefits and outcomes to take effect. Any other thoughts on that question?
I'll just say that there has been really good academic research on the benefits of increased funding for students with higher needs, and that specifically the return on investment is much, much greater from increasing funding for students from low income backgrounds. That ultimately, if you have $1 to put towards education, you will get the best bang for that buck by supporting low income students. That ultimately the returns tend to be much more flat for upper income students. And when I say the returns, I will say there's research on every possible measure. Increases in reading and math test scores, increases in SAT scores, sure, but also in things like adult employment and earnings, reduced levels of criminality, the rate of poverty as an adult and what those graduates pass on to their children. There's lots of very long time horizon research on the importance of investing more money in the students with the highest needs. And so I think the state can choose measures that are most meaningful to them. I think some things are only practical for longer term research. I don't think it makes sense to hold a school district accountable today for the poverty rates of the children of its graduates, because that won't reflect current policy, but it's still very revealing to understand where the impact has been and where the impact could go in the future.
Jackson Johnson Persico study that you told me about like 10 years ago that I looked at yesterday.
That study was very groundbreaking, and that the researchers in that study have continued to study different elements of these systems. And they're, from Nobel Prize winner David Card and more recent researchers. I mean, there's a huge body of, at this point, very, very strong evidence that increased investments in students absolutely matter.
Well, what expertise and talent we have up here on stage. Let's give a great big applause to Kwabila, Zahava, Taylor, and Emily. You've been so generous with your time and your talent and your expertise. Really grateful to all of you for joining us here today. So thank you so much. And I'll let you exit the stage, and we're now going to have help in closing us out. And in order to do that, I'm going to invite Tiana Sermons from Del Castle High School to the stage to wrap us up. Tiana?
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Tiana Sermons. I am a sophomore at Del Castle Technical High School studying digital media. Today, you've had the opportunity to hear all about student-centered funding, and I can say again just how important it truly is. Oftentimes, we as students aren't aware of issues like this and how much they truly impact us. As a student, I often hear in my school how low budget our schools are or how bad they are in terms of our building, our resources, and other factors that funding covers. We never really take into consideration, though, that what really goes into it, and how much of those issues the school can specifically control. We don't know what goes on behind the scenes in our districts and about the issues that impact us. Funding doesn't always tend to cater to students, but rather just towards the educators, and the staff. While it is important, it's not specifically the same as giving back to us as the students. The way our education environments are now can impact us forever. It can impact our memory of our school, it can impact our level of education, and it can negatively impact different communities. It can even lead to a difference in your future career or opportunities that you have. However, that shouldn't be the case. No matter your environment or your district, no student should have to face disadvantages due to lack of resources or funding out of their control. We all have the chance to we all need the chance to have specifically catered education that benefits us and caters to our proper needs, varying but equally important. You have to take into account the fact that not everyone comes from the same home, the same opportunities, the same lifestyles, the same education, or the same needs. Some students may need more time, more resources, and more attention than others, as has been mentioned. And we see it every day. We see those schools and those students. But what do we really do to help out as students? Well, this is it. While this isn't the final solution, this is a huge step in the right direction. We students are the end users of this funding. That is why it's so important for us to take the opportunity to acknowledge issues and do what we can to help out. So I encourage you to participate in public engagement sections, go out and speak at the PEFC meetings, attend Spotlight Delaware Legislative Summit on January 7th, where this will be a topic, and also sign up for the VC newsletter to stay up to date. Those are just a few simple steps and simple ways to get your foot in the door and to make a difference for our educational communities. We are the now, and our voices deserve to be heard by communities to get through the issues that impact us so greatly. Hearing an issue from the consumer or the end user can go a long way in society. So, to keep it brief, thank you so much for your time. I hope that everybody enjoyed this event. And again, I'm Tiana Sermons. Have an amazing rest of your day.